two kind of carcinoma can arise from the kidney. One is renal cell carcinoma, another is transitional cell carcinoma. Majority of the cases, around 80%, we get renal cell carcinoma, and around 8% cases we get transitional cell carcinoma, which arises from the urothelium or the transitional cell lining of the pelvis and calyceal region. But when we think about a cancer in kidney, we basically think about renal cell carcinoma. And renal cell carcinoma is called renal cell carcinoma because this is a cancer, this is a malignancy which arises from the renal tubular epithelium, mostly proximal renal tubular epithelium. Now, you know from your basic knowledge about the cancer, the nomenclature of the cancer, that if any malignancy, if any cancer arises from the epithelium, we call it carcinoma. Just like if any cancer arises from solid mesenchymal tissue, we call it sarcoma. So this is a cancer which is arising from, not from glomerulus, not from interstitium, not from blood vessel, but from the tubule, and particularly from the renal tubular epithelium. And that's why this cancer is known as renal cell carcinoma, because this is a cancer which arising from the tubular epithelium. It's an epithelial origin cancer. So that justifies the name, that it's a renal cell carcinoma. So first thing that you should understand, that if any cancer arising in the kidney, particularly in the adults, we think about renal cell carcinoma, because 80 to 85% of the cancers actually which they are arising from the kidney, they are renal cell carcinoma. And some cases, 8% cases, if they are arising from the pelvis and calyceal region, that would be transitional cell carcinoma. In the children, we can get Wilms tumor, around 5 to 10% cases roughly. But this is not 5 to 10% actually, usually 5 to 6%, better to say, that they don't go beyond transitional cell carcinoma in most of the cases. And other cancers like sarcomas are there, can occur, but they are very rare actually. So mostly we get three kind of cancer, malignant tumors from the kidney. One is renal cell carcinoma, second is transitional cell carcinoma, third is Wilms tumor. Now we are mostly discuss on this session about the renal cell carcinoma. Now renal cell carcinoma is actually I will be discussing about their risk factors, we'll be discussing about their the genetic features which are associated with this, how they develop, their pathogenesis, their manifestation, and how they will diagnose them through the biopsy and other morphologic features. So firstly, about the risk factors, the most important risk factor for the renal cell carcinoma is smoking. They're quite common in the smokers, and particularly they are mostly common seen in the male smoker. They are also much more common in the males. And the other risk factors which have been seen associated are obesity, hypertension, and particularly some occupational hazards, some occupational exposure, particularly to the heavy metals like cadmium. If you're working in a alkaline battery industry, where you get chance to exposure to the cadmium, then you are at risk. Similarly, asbestos exposure has also been linked to development of renal cell carcinoma. So these are the risk factors. There are other risk factors also. Some genetic renal cell carcinoma syndromes are there which can act as a risk factor. For example, von Hippel-Lindau syndrome can act as a risk factor for clear cell variant of renal cell carcinoma. Hereditary papillary carcinoma is a hereditary syndrome which can act as a risk factor for papillary renal cell carcinoma. Barth-Hogg-Dubé syndrome, BHD syndrome, that can act as a risk factor. BHD syndrome can act as a risk factor for oncocytic tumors and chromophobe renal cell carcinoma. So, and then there are genetic risk factors also, which we'll be discussing in the details. And if there is acquired cystic disease of the kidney, that can also act as a risk factor for the development of the renal cell carcinoma. So these are and another one which you should remember, that if you are having sickle cell disease, particularly sickle cell trait, then an uncommon variant of kidney cancer, which is known as renal medullary carcinoma, it actually acts as a risk factor for the development of the renal medullary carcinoma. So all these are risk factors. The most common one is tobacco exposure, tobacco smoking. Other than that, hypertension, obesity, genetic syndromes like VHL syndrome, exposure to the various metals like cadmium, and acquired cystitis of the kidney as a result of dialysis, and obviously the sickle cell trait, which I mentioned, could act as a risk factor for medullary renal cell carcinoma, which is an uncommon variant typically seen in young adults, which is though it's a very aggressive variant. Now, the next thing that we need to know about the renal cell carcinoma is their subtypes. Renal cell carcinoma has many subtypes actually. The most common one which we see in the majority of the cases, 80 to 85%, is clear cell variant of renal cell carcinoma. Other than that, there are papillary variant of renal cell carcinoma seen in 10 to 15% cases. 5 to 10% cases we can see chromophobe variant of renal cell carcinoma. Then there is a collecting duct variant carcinoma, medullary renal carcinoma, which is thought to be a variant of the collecting duct. So oncocytic variant. So there are many XP11.2 translocation associated renal cell carcinoma. There are many variants are there, but particularly need to know about the three variant: clear cell carcinoma, clear cell variant of the renal cell carcinoma. Second one is papillary renal cell carcinoma, and third one is chromophobe variant of the renal cell carcinoma. But in this session, I'll be mostly talking about clear cell variant of renal cell carcinoma. I'll do a separate session on the other variants of the renal cell carcinoma, because the most common variant of the renal cell carcinoma is clear cell variant of renal cell carcinoma. So when we are talking about renal cell carcinoma in an unspecified manner, not specifying anything, we are basically talking about clear cell variant of renal cell carcinoma, which is the most common. Majority of the renal cell carcinomas are the clear cell subtype. Now, why it is called clear cell carcinoma or clear cell variant of RCC? Because the cells look very clear on the biopsy, because the cells contain a lot of lipid and glycogen, and that's actually gives the cell a kind of pale appearance on the biopsy cytoplasm, and that's why they call clear cell carcinoma. Now, clear cell carcinoma, here is a very important concept is there. Clear cell carcinomas typically associated with some kind of abnormalities of the short arm of the chromosome 3, and there is a tumor suppressor gene is there known as VHL gene, von Hippel-Lindau gene. Now, you need to understand one basic concept, that 95% of the renal cell carcinoma, clear cell variant of the renal cell carcinoma, they are sporadic, and 5% cases they will be hereditary. The hereditary one, they are typically associated with VHL syndrome. But the other 95%, which are sporadic, they are also associated with some abnormality of the VHL gene. Many times I've seen that people confuse in this way, that they think that only the hereditary form of the clear cell RCC, they are associated with abnormalities of the chromosome 3p or the VHL gene mutation. It's not like that. Even the sporadic form, which are the majorities of the clear cell variant of the RCC, they are also associated with some mutation the VHL gene or some abnormalities of the chromosome 3p. So that's a very important point that you need to know. Now, mostly the clear cell variant of RCC, they are seen in the cortex of the kidney, because clear cell carcinoma of the RCC, they arises from the proximal and tubular epithelium, and the proximal tubules are mostly associated in the cortex region, cortical region. So you see them in the cortex, and grossly they look quite yellowish because the tumors have high lipid content, and anything which has a lot of lipids, they look yellowish, like lipoma. If you see lipoma grossly, this look yellowish. And clear cell variant of RCC, or in general RCC, they can present in many ways. Problematic thing is that they many times remain silent, and the first presentation could be as metastasis, particularly the lungs or bone. And if they present, the presentation is highly variable. Nowadays, due to the frequent uses of radiologic techniques, many times we detect them accidentally, or otherwise they could be detected with some kind of abdominal mass or the flank pain, or it could be there some kind of hematuria, that could be the presentation. Hematuria is obviously you have to always think about not only renal cell carcinoma, you have to also think about the bladder carcinoma, because in the smokers with hematuria, it could be bladder cancer also. And then they have a lot of paraneoplastic syndromes, like small cell carcinoma of lung. There are a lot of paraneoplastic syndromes to be associated with them. Like they can present with Cushing syndrome due to release of ACTH. They can have polycythemia due to release of erythropoietin. They can have the presence of multiple other paraneoplastic syndromes. One of them, which worth mentioning, is Stauffer syndrome, where there is a liver dysfunction is seen in these patients of the renal cell carcinoma. Though there is no metastasis to the liver, so it's a non-metastatic hepatic dysfunction associated with the renal cell carcinoma. It's spelled STAUFFER syndrome, Stauffer. And then the other features which you can see, they can have hypertension as a paraneoplastic manifestation, because they release renin, that can cause hypertension as a paraneoplastic manifestation. They can present with varicocele, particularly the left-sided varicocele also. And this tumor has a tendency to invade the veins, particularly renal veins, and many times they can invade the even IVC also. So compress IVC, inferior vena cava. They can present with secondary amyloidosis. So I mentioned that the presentation is highly variable. The first presentation could be metastasis also in 10 to 15% cases, particularly the lungs metastasis. So presentation could be in many ways actually, and wherever the metastasis is occurring, it could present as a metastatic mass. So that's the and even if they're metastasis to the other abdominal organs, that can present with and the mass is also. But as I mentioned, that many times they are nowadays detected actually accidentally also as in asymptomatic stage. That's the key point that you need to understand. So next we'll be going to their biopsy features actually. So biopsy, they typically shows a cluster of polygonal cells, and those cells have pale cytoplasm because they have a lot of glycogen and the lipid. I'm talking about clear cell renal cell carcinoma in this particular Insta lecture. And nuclear grading is done in the histological biopsy section also, particularly the Furman grading, FUHRMN, Furman's grading, and nowadays that's replaced by WHO ISUP, International Society of Urological Pathology. These two gradings are done also for the renal cell carcinoma, and it helps in prognosis. And the other features are the biopsy features which are there, that this tumor has rich vasculature, and particularly the fibrous septa with blood vessel, they traverse through the cluster of the tumor cells, and that creates a chicken wire vasculature pattern. Please remember, this is a vasculature, chicken wire vasculature pattern. Chicken wire fibrosis pattern could be seen in liver biopsy in cases of alcoholic liver diseases or NAS. Chicken wire calcification pattern could be seen in a cartilage forming bone tumor chondroblastoma. But here I am talking about the chicken wire vasculature pattern. And chicken wire vasculature pattern is also not exclusive for renal cell carcinoma biopsy. It can be seen in myxoid liposarcoma. It can be seen in a brain tumor, oligodendroglioma. So there are many conditions it can be seen. So these two are quite clear cytoplasm, this septa with vasculature creating a chicken wire vasculature pattern. These are the characteristic feature, and you need to remember the nuclear grading system also. So these are the key points on the biopsy findings. The other key features I will be discussing, particularly the association of the VHL, I will be discussing in the next lecture. Thank you very much.